Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets. Or you can subscribe to the channel, click that notifications button and get a new notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Let's talk boxing. I'm going to talk about the Matchroom card. Now, before we get onto the Matchroom card, I just want to quickly say this. I'm going to talk about Buatsi, Dalton Smith, Lerone Richards. All three of them impressed me massively. But my intellectual method of processing fighters, the analytical approach that I utilize essentially, is based on the concept of trying to find weaknesses as though I'm the one who's fighting them. So if I'm going to fight any one of these guys next, how do I go about how do I win the fight? How do I go about exploiting their errors? So even when somebody puts in a punch perfect performance, you will always see me come here and talk about areas they need to improve, because that's the method that I go through, the journey that I go through to analyze. It's not me having a go at these guys or having a pop at them. I'm very impressed with all of them. It's just that that's the method I go through. By the same token, if I wasn't fighting them or training someone fighting them and I was actually working with them, let's say that one of them hired me as a performance analyst and said to me, Chris, I've seen the work you do on YouTube. I love it. I'm going to employ you to start watching all my opponents and watch me as well. And I want you to tell me all the errors that I make. Well, I'd go through the same process so that they can plug the gaps. Okay. So I'm just trying to explain the method of thought process that I go through. So I don't want anybody thinking that I'm just having a pop at these guys. I'm going to start off with Joshua Buatsi. Now, Buatsi has obviously impressed me for a long time. I've spoken about him since his amateur days as being someone that I really looked forward to turning pro. And what I love about Buatsi, he's clearly, in my opinion, a scientist in the sense that everything he does in terms of the fundamentals is very on point, and he's clearly a thinking fighter, and you can see he's joined up with Virgil Hunter precisely because he wants to learn his craft. Now, this concept of a scientist versus an artist, I'm going to explore further in a video this week when I'm going to, along the backdrop of Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, okay, we're going to talk about the difference between science and artistry when it comes to the sport of boxing. Is a particular fighter a martial artist or is he a martial scientist? I know that's not a term typically used. I'm going to coin it for the purposes of this video. But yeah, the point is, with Buatsi, all the fundamentals are pretty much spot on. His footwork's very good. His balance is excellent. Everything works off of a jab. The way he changes the height dynamic is with his legs rather than his upper body. All these things, the way he throws his hook, it's not too wide so that it's telegraphed, but it almost looks like an arm punch in the sense that he's not overloading on it, which means it's a harder pattern to read and he doesn't come out of position to throw that shot. Those elements are something you also see with Gennady Golovkin. Now, I'm not comparing Buatsi to Golovkin, okay? Golovkin is a very, very special fighter, an elite level middleweight, one of the best of all time in the middleweight division as far as I'm concerned. And people do not really appreciate or understand, I feel, just how good Golovkin is. I think people just seem to assume the guy's a puncher. Believe me, that's far from all he is. In fact, I don't even think Golovkin's that big of a single puncher. He's a very solid puncher, but that's the least most important aspect of his game. So I'm not comparing Buatsi to Golovkin, so I don't want any Golovkin fans to lose their minds out there. I'm just trying to say that there's elements of him where, I can imagine that he might have watched Golovkin and picked up on a few things. But Golovkin does other things that are a lot better than Buatsi, and there is room for improvement for Buatsi. Golovkin can set a tempo and cut off the ring in a manner that is unparalleled, really. The foot pressure he used to put on in his prime was unbelievable. He's much better at hiding himself as a target. Everything's deflected off of the elbows and the forearms. He offers just the forehead as a target. Buatsi's not quite as durable, I don't believe, and he doesn't, based on the Kalic fight, he doesn't offer that same level of incessant pressure, although he had Dos Santos looking very panicked, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Buatsi also, everything's off the jab, a very solid jab, like I said. He's also, though, very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's very, very good with the fundamentals, okay? It's something that Floyd would say there's no special effects there, but there's an element of weakness with regards to him being a target. He's easier to find than Golovkin. And we'll talk about if he doesn't fix this, it could end up leading to a very violent demise as he goes through the levels. Okay, so although I think the sky's the limit in terms of his potential, at the moment, I think there are some striking limitations, which we're going to go into now and talk about. But one thing I do like about Buatsi, which you also find in Golovkin, is that Buatsi is he's a very cerebral fighter. He's a thinking fighter. And you can see the methodical method in which he goes through to break a fighter down. He deconstructs an opponent inside that ring. And there are elements that you can see here throughout the fight. If you go to 1 minute and 37 seconds, for example, of round number 2, you can see that he puts his hand out just a short little. He doesn't actually throw the jab. He just paws with it as though he's threatening to throw a jab. It's almost like a feint. And you see Dos Santos, by the way, like I said, Dos Santos has no great shakes. We'll talk about it in a second. But you see Dos Santos' hand come forward. He's looking to catch that jab. He's looking to pat down on it. Immediately, you see that Buatsi has registered this. So he shapes up in exactly the same method. And instead of throwing a jab, he throws a hook, knowing that Dos Santos might look to pat down again. And he comes around the shot. Now, this shot misses, but it shows his ability to think about what he's doing. And if you look at the actual knockdown, for example, the knockout, throughout the fight, he was coming low and he was shooting that spear-like right hand to the body. He did it with a few jabs too. Very powerful, very powerful. And you could see in the build in the Lerone Richards fight, they went to their changing rooms, and you could see that he had his guard up like this, and you saw that Virgil Hunter was there showing him the center line and talking to him about something, and sort of out of a crouch. Now, we know that Andre Ward used to love this particular move of coming in low, looking down as though he's going to go to your body, and then with a jab, he'd use a jab, he'd shoot a left hand upstairs. He did it with the right hand too against Kovalev, but generally his go-to move was with the jab. Come downstairs, I can't really turn here, I'm by a wall, but he'd be shoulders on and then shoot the jab upwards, like an up jab through the center line when you think he's going to jab to the solar plexus, and then he'll fall into you as well, so he'll close the range on you doing that. It's a very, very difficult to defend. And post-fight, Virgil Hunter said he did something that I was talking to him about working on, and that was looking low but throwing the shot high. And you saw that he was investing in the body low throughout, before the knockout came, where he shaped up as though he was going downstairs and instead he threw a right hand upstairs. So you're talking about various elements of investing for the future, which, you know, obviously it shows that he's a thinking fighter. Now, Dos Santos looked panicked. He was losing his construct consistently, to be honest with you. He was in situations where he was sort of getting on the ropes and he'd be in a defensive posture. And when he was in a defensive posture, he'd lose his position, so he couldn't come back. He was panicking. There was panic there. So I'm not saying there's any great shakes. Now, Barry Jones also picked up on the fact that his jab was low and lazy, and he wasn't bringing it back quickly enough. So the right hand over the top was there for Buatsi earlier than when he threw it. Okay, so although 4 rounds is a nice, efficient time to get a fighter out of there, the fact of the matter is it was there for him earlier. But rather than just throw it, he clearly wanted to work on things and think his way through the fight. And you can see that. You could see that cerebral element to him. Another thing that I want you to go and look at is go and look at round 4. 1 minute and 52 seconds left of the round. He throws a throwaway jab. Okay. So again, throws the jab without really doing anything. He's just trying to draw Dos Santos onto something. Just like he did earlier with the example I gave you. He then comes low. So he throws that throwaway jab. Dos Santos covers up. He comes low to throw a hook to the body. As he goes low to throw a hook to the body, he waits for Dos Santos to fall back and cover up further. Then he pauses. In other words, he shapes up to throw the left hook. So he's thrown a throwaway jab, drops to the side, goes to throw the left hook to the body, but pauses to allow Dos Santos to finish his defensive move. Then he rips that hook into the body. Do you understand what I'm saying? He's picked up on a pattern of the way Dos Santos is falling onto the ropes to cover up. And from that pattern, he's thought, right, if I throw it off the beat, I'll catch him out. And this to me shows a very high level of thinking. He's an operator in there. He's thinking, he's scientific in his approach. And he's 28 years old, and they're going to have to move him on quickly because, listen, fairly quickly. And Virgil Hunter has spoken about within 2 years, he wants to see him have a world title shot. So they're not going to dilly-dally too much. But while I agree with this approach, and he can't take off too much time, there are areas that unless he sorts out, if he goes to world level, I believe you'll see him knocked out. quite violently as well, to be honest with you. He needs to fix a couple of things. First and foremost, one of the movement that he gets, which is very, very good, the way he does this, is with bending at the legs, but he can remain a little bit upright. In other words, he'll duck under shots while remaining quite upright. He'll come low below a jab or a straight right hand, then shoot his hooks or straight power shots or whatever it might be. Now, Golovkin also does this, but Golovkin is more out of a crouch and he's more covered up in like a turtle shell, and he's harder to hit. Whereas what Buatsi tends to do is come low without any lateral movement at all. And so his head often stays on the center line. It might go up and down, but you'll never really see it come off of the line. Golovkin will come off the line. He doesn't. And what that means is that before you've even thrown a shot, before he's thrown a shot or you've thrown a shot, you know, in terms of laterally, which line he will be in. And this is something he's going to have to sort out. Because it's great when you're coming under straight shots. You might even come under hooks. But if someone throws quite a low sort of hook rather than to the top of your head, you could fall into a shot. And I spoke in the preview of the Canelo-Billy Joe Saunders fight about how Billy Joe tends to duck a lot. Listen, you guys know I think Billy Joe's a top level fighter, right? But he ducks a lot. And I explained that there's a possibility that he will duck directly into a power shot. And that's exactly what happened. Well, I'm telling you, there's a possibility he will duck directly into a shot, Buatsi, unless he sorts this out, potentially an uppercut through the center line. Or a hook where it's sort of like a shovel hook where it's rising, where he can't come underneath it and he'll walk straight onto it. And that's a potential problem for him. The other thing, and I can't remember, I should have written down what minute this was in the fight, man. But part of me's thinking of pausing this video and then going and finding it. But I'd have to go through the whole 4 rounds. There's one moment where Dos Santos has his back to the camera and he's on the ropes, okay? And he takes a little step to the left and throws a left hand down the pipe. And he catches Buatsi. And Buatsi is not affected at all. There's nothing on the shot because Dos Santos is obviously afraid to hold his feet. He's panicked. But that lateral movement, followed by that quick shot, the minute he lines that shoulder up with his face, Buatsi doesn't see that coming. Now, if that's a big puncher, if that's a Bivol who knows how to... And I know Bivol's not Beterbiev in terms of power, but he's a much more solid puncher than Dos Santos. If that's Bivol who understands the lateral movement and he's getting Buatsi, catching him off guard with little movements, lining him up, pop with a left hand, move the other side, come under a shot, line him up again, pop with the other shot. I believe Buatsi with that center line will struggle to get out the way of those shots. Now, someone like Anthony Yard, who has a very powerful short right hand, you can't get away with stuff like that. Anthony Yard also has a leaping left hook, which Buatsi seems to get out the way of those very, very well. But if that becomes like a shovel hook, and again, he dips onto something, these guys have got the power to really affect you. Johnson, Yard, Beterbiev, Smith, they're all big punchers. So for me, he's got to work on this aspect of getting out of the center line with some lateral head movement. But that aside, I think he's terrific. He's terrific. I love these shorts going a little bit off the a bit of a random comment, but I love these shorts. I love the color scheme. That looked cool. Listen, I've met him on only one occasion. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know him well and I'm his friend or anything, but I met him on one occasion away from cameras and stuff like that. You know how you see him come across as this class act. You saw Dos Santos break down and cry. Clearly, a few of you have been really critical on Twitter when I retweeted this and said what a class act Buatsi was, because he went backstage to console him as well, because he was crying in the ring, Dos Santos, and backstage. And a few of you were saying, one of you actually said it's absolutely pathetic. Andrew Pradamecki, shout out to Andrew, felt that it was pathetic that he saw a guy like that bawling his eyes out. But listen, guys, you have to understand something, man. This guy he was in the army, Dos Santos, then he went to prison. So you'd have to imagine that he's not managed to build anything for himself, financially speaking, or to build any sort of real life, okay? Not yet anyway, because he would have had a lot of interruptions in his life. You're not going to make any real money in the military, and you're certainly not going to make any real money in prison, right? Unless you're engaging in other activities in there. So this is a guy that's had a dream and looking to get his life back on track. Now, if he could have come and derailed Joshua Buatsi, an Olympian, Well, there's going to be a rematch, which is going to involve some good money. And if he can give a good account of himself, even if he was to lose the rematch, think about the level of depth in the light heavyweight scene here in the UK. So, you know, you're talking about potentially changing his life. So him then failing to achieve that, listen, it takes a lot out of you emotionally, man, to dedicate your life to something and then not achieve your dreams. Crying isn't necessarily a sign of weakness. It's merely an expression of emotion. I've known some bad men that would cry. So one of them would cry whenever he was going to have a fight. And believe me, this was a guy that, I mean, listen, he's a small guy. He was a small guy. You know, I wouldn't be intimidated fighting him or anything like that. But if you were his size, believe me, you wouldn't want to fight this guy. He was a tough dude. But he'd cry whenever he'd lose his temper. That's a process. His method of processing emotion doesn't mean you're weak. So don't judge too much, man. Santos obviously went through a traumatic experience. You know, his children were there apparently as well. Being knocked out in front of your kids like that, that's horrible, man. And, you know, he broke down. Buatsi, very, very good performance. This video's dragged on way too much. So I'm not going to do Dalton Smith and Lerone Richards in this video. I'm going to do an immediate video post this. And I'll talk about them. I guess you could say prospect watches. I mean, I've spoken about Lerone Richards in the past, but, you know, it's been a couple of years now since I first spoke about him. But yeah, we'll talk about those in a separate video. Let me know what you think of Joshua Buatsi. How do you rate him compared to the other light heavyweights in the UK? At this current moment in time, I would take Johnson and Yard over him for sure. Lyndon Arthur is a 50-50 fight. Now, I know Lyndon Arthur beat Anthony Yard according to the official scorecards. Personally, I had that a draw. I do think Yard at this moment, in terms of, you know, if they were to fight again, I do believe Yard wins the fight. They're all terrific. I believe he'd beat Spider Richards. I believe, like I said, the Lyndon Arthur fight's a really good fight. I believe I'd go probably with Buatsi there. The point is, I have him at number 3, personally. But the sky's the limit in terms of his potential. If he can sort out that lateral head movement, he could very well leapfrog the other two. So let me know what you think. Where do you rate him at the moment? Lovely kid. Like I said, when I met him, I'm not making out like I'm his best mate or anything. I met him one time, but the way he is off camera, that class act, is the way he is in real life. Very gentle, almost like those kung fu movies where you see this old man that barely speaks. That's what he was like. Softly spoken. He's quite slim. Doesn't look like a fighter at all when you're standing next to him. Doesn't look intimidating. But clearly the boy knows how to fight. So he's a very likable character that could end up transcending just boxing, in my opinion, because he is so likable. So let me know what you think about him. Is he a potential future star, or do you think in this stacked weight division he will come unstuck? Next video is up and coming. Subscribe, hit that like button. Chat to you soon. Thank you for watching. Take care. God bless.